Shalom and welcome to Life Lessons. And we are in segment 40. You know, in the Talmud, they speak a lot about number 40, especially in the Kabbalah. In the Torah, we find many times the idea of 40 is mentioned. Moshe was 40 days on the mountain, 3 times where God revealed himself. The years that the Israelites, our ancestors, were in the desert is 40 years. Many things is connected with the idea of 40. In the Talmud it also says it takes 40 years for a student to understand the depth of what the teacher told him. So sometimes we sit there, we hear something from our teachers and we don't understand it at that moment. It may take 40 years till we really understand it. It says even in Kabbalah, you shouldn't start studying Kabbalah before you're 40 years old. So there's a lot of significance to the idea of 40, and in the Ethics of Our Father, where it talks about the different stages in our lives, it says when we come to the age of 40, we reach a new level of understanding. It says Arba'im Lebina, a new level of understanding. So the idea of 40 has, I would say, a paradigm shift of what we have done till now. All of a sudden, we understand much better. So when we come to this portion in the Torah, segment 40 is the Parsha of Balak. This is the story of the king of Moab, where he hired Balaam to go curse the Jewish people. And then what we see is whenever Balaam opened his mouth to curse, only blessings came out. So that was an amazing miracle done by God, that Balaam was known as a wicked person, and he was known as a prophet. And it's interesting that here you have a prophet that is wicked. And it says that some of the nations were almost like kind of a complaining, how come that the Jewish people then have Moses, who's his counterpart for the rest of the people? So some appointed on themselves Balaam. But the problem with Balaam is that he used his so-called prophecy not to do good, but to do harm. So when Balak turns to him in our portion here and it says, I'm afraid they just came out of Egypt and they're going to pass by my place and swallow up. And he uses the expression here in verse 4 on chapter 22, and he says, they just as an ox in the field eats up vegetation, that's how they're going to come here and do it. So he begs Balaam, do me a favor and go curse these people. What's interesting is, in the story that everyone could see, that in the beginning, Bilam says, in Hebrew we call him Bilam, so Bilam says, I cannot say something that God won't allow me to talk. So I don't know if I could go. Well, Balak says, stay here the night. Let me convince you. Let me shower you with money and all kinds of goods. You should do what I want you to do. And then we see here that God appears to Bilam and he says to him, don't go. And Bilam says, I can't go. Stay one more night. And then what it seems like that Bilam really wants to go, so finally God tells him, look, you could go, but only what I tell you to do, I will do. So it's interesting what's going to follow here. We're going to see how Bilam is going to try to do certain things to remind maybe God the no good things that the Jewish people have done, that should bring the anger of God instead of the blessing of God. So he's trying all kinds of angles, but when he's about to speak out, it doesn't work, and only blessings comes out. That even the greatest prophecy of all, that in the end of the time there's going to be a ruler, and he will be the ultimate Redeemer, that this is known as the Messiah. That is what was told to the prophet Bilam. This prophecy is in our portion over here. And it's interesting to note how he mentions it, and that's in chapter 24, verse 17. He says, I see him, but not now. I perceive him, but he is not near. A star will shoot from Yaakov, a staff will arise from Israel, and he will crush the princes of Moab. He will devastate the descendant of Shais, and then Israel will be successful. Talking about the ultimate redemption, that this is the prophecy that speaks later in the prophets, in Isaiah, in other places in the prophets about more details about the Messiah. But here we have the first time mentioned that there's going to be such a thing, that by the end, things will turn out and be okay. So, obviously, Balak, the king of Moab, was very angry with Bilam. He says, I hired you to curse, and you are only blessing. And he says, well, didn't I tell you? What God puts in my mouth, that's the only thing what I could do. But interesting enough, later on, known in the section Kitetze in Deuteronomy, and it's important to note, there's a verse, and this is the verse when in chapter 23, verse 7. Here in this section, the Torah recounts what has happened. This is in the 40th year in the desert. They're about to go in to Israel. And we have to understand there were a lot of downs in the history. It's the second generation that's going in, because the first generation had failed. They sent the spies, they did things. So they are all dying in the desert. It's the second generation that's going in. So Moses, that is also about to pass away, is going over with them on everything that has happened, that they should be aware for all the generations to come. So he also goes over with them with a story of Balak and Bilam. And when he describes what happens, just in one verse, he says like this, because it sums up what we have in our section 40, the portion of Balak, with a longer story. But here in one verse, it tells us like this. But God, your God, did not want to listen to Bilam. And God, your God, transformed the curse into a blessing for you, because God, your God, loves you. So here we get, I would say, in short, what was going on here in our section is that it was a transformation. The words over here is, God did not want to listen to Bilam, and he transformed the curse. Sometimes there's a situation where a person acts in a way of indifference, don't care, not interested. Yeah, do I like this person, or I don't like this person? Don't make a difference. That person is not on my agenda. It's no. But then there is a situation where you say, I really can't stand that individual. I think they say he gets under my skin. Can't take it. So how do you deal with it? One way to deal with it, I would say, let's say you justified about not being happy with that other person. If you're not justified, then you've got a problem. You need to work on your situation. Let's say it's a situation where the person gets under your skin, and that person is at fault. How do you deal with it? So one way of dealing with it, that you stay above the whole situation. You position yourself in a situation that that individual doesn't exist, doesn't bother me. He could say whatever he wants, she or him. He doesn't bother me whatsoever. Then there is an interesting situation that I have to say, not so many of us succeed. Where you succeeded in turning that individual to your friend. Not only that you did not ignore and you make yourself feel that the other person doesn't exist. This is one way of doing things. You worked on yourself and on the other to change the situation. Now, when you say to change the situation, also could be many different levels. One level could be that person stopped insulting. But that doesn't mean he became your friend. He stopped insulting, finish. I live here, you live there. I don't bother you, you don't bother me. I don't need to know you till the rest of end of life, let's say. Then there is where the person says to himself, you know what? I want to do something about it. And I want that person should become my friend. And you work on that to change the situation till that individual becomes your friend. And everyone just becomes amazed. This is the individual that bothered, yelled, screamed. Without going too much in politics and political situation, but let's say people that, for example, don't like a certain political leader, that they can't stand them till they say, he gets under my skin. So not only that they don't care about that person, they change the situation to a point to say, wow, I can't believe it. So everyone will agree the ultimate transformation is when you take a situation where it was so bad and all of a sudden you changed it completely. That is what it's written in Jewish thoughts and in Talmud and in Kabbalah. The ultimate is for us down here in this world is transformation. Transformation. And that's the reason, the way God created us, that we have struggles. We have an evil inclination and we have a good inclination. And the way it is, for quite a few of us, sometimes the good inclination succeeds, and unfortunately, sometimes the evil inclination succeeds. So it's a constant battle. So one way of looking to it, even amongst ourselves, the way we look on ourselves, is where I succeeded that the evil inclination doesn't bother me. But what's the evil inclination inside me? Has that been transformed? No. It's just you're too strong in your principles and what you believe that, as we would say, the enemy lays low. As some of us would say, the reason why Canada doesn't invade the United States, because the United States is very powerful. But then is, as I mentioned before, even amongst ourselves, you succeeded that the evil inclination has transformed and only wants good. How we are from the day we're born, especially when we're younger, and the Torah says that in the beginning in Genesis, in the Chumash of Bereshis, that the human being was created to begin with an inclination to do bad. That's how the human being was created. And we all know that if we are not educated, take for example, if God forbid, parents do not educate their children, or children that grew up without parents, and they had nobody to educate them, guaranteed that they are doomed to fail. Unless there was a good environment, good teachers, good friends that changed the situation. Why? Because the tendency of us as we are younger, if we are not directed, is to do no good. That's how God instilled in us. But why? Because if we succeed and do good, that's an unbelievable transformation. So that's what he wants from us all the time. No question. It's beautiful when somebody is born and has no temptations whatsoever and grows up and he's good, he's wonderful, he's righteous, everything is, no question, it's good. However, tells us the Talmud, what God likes even more than that is when an individual was challenged and overcame the challenge. That person that wasn't challenged, we don't know what will be if you throw that individual into a whole place of challenges and temptations. How are they going to deal with it? You have no idea. You only know that he's been, wherever it is, he's strong and never had temptations. But when a person deals with temptations and then transforms the situation, then that's a whole different story. So now, that's what happens here in our section here, section 40, with the idea of evil. Balak cannot stand the good that the Jewish people represent. Can't stand it. He wants to curse them. So he's looking to bring up whatever he can, anything bad out there, to remind the Almighty that don't be blind with your love to these people. They're human beings that make mistakes. And then what you try to do sometimes when you don't like somebody, and we all know that sometimes we do that unwillingly. You don't like somebody and you're talking to somebody else. I'm not going in how terrible it is, the gossip and all that. You right away try to destroy the other person by bringing up some of the faults of that individual, even though they're just minute. But you build up that little bit that bad that it is there, and then you create of the other guy as a monster, and then we stay away from that person. So that's what Balak and Bilam are trying to do. They know they got a problem. God took them out of Egypt. So obviously he loves them. And he showers them all the time with good things. But he knows that sometimes these people, as we would say, are spoiled brats. And from time to time, they misbehave. Still, God's love overpowers the deficiencies that exist. But they're trying to remind it. And when they, especially Bilam, is trying to proclaim that with the idea to remind God about all this, and he wants to open his mouth, and he can't because all of a sudden only positive and more than what he has ever imagined comes out from his mouth. And just to use one of the examples here, an amazing statement that he makes. On chapter 24, verse 5, this is in his description about the Jewish people. He says, "How beautiful are you tents, Jacob, your dwelling Israel." He's standing from the mountain, and he's watching how the Jewish people pitch their tents. And we're talking about close to 3 million people, and they all have their families and the tents. And he tell us something interesting. As he's watching, he saw an amazing thing. The entrance to each tent is not against the entrance of the other tent. It's always on the side. So you have one tent, the entrance on one side, the other tent, the entrance on the other side. So no tent's entrance faces another door, all for the purpose of modesty. and privacy. He was amazed by seeing that. He wanted to say, look how strange these people are, secluded, anti-brotherhood. And as he's about to start cursing, he just couldn't help himself, because we know God is putting those words. How beautiful your tents are, your dwelling Israel. Yeah, couldn't help himself. And only beautiful things come out of his mouth. In that whole discussion comes something very interesting that we will understand regarding this whole idea of transformation and what he's trying to do against the opposite. You know, when we talk about transformation, obviously we're talking about the positive, but everything has a counterpart. So the same as there's transformation in positive, there's transformation in evil. There's some people from time to time they do no good things, but fine. But we could say majority of the time they get back to normal and they do the right thing. From time to time there's a little bit of a failure. But then there's other people that it's hard to find any good there. Completely evil. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of people say, no, it can't be. Well, we live in a world that there is such a thing. Without going into too much of description, you got the ISIS and other crazy things. Pure evil. Pure evil. So here, so we have those two things. So the same thing we find about what Bilam was trying to do here. And I'll quote the verse here and I'll explain it. It says, after he got the permission from God to go, and God says, well, remember, what I tell you to speak, that's what you should do. The verse says in chapter 18, verse 21, it says as follows. Bilam got up in the morning. He's eager. He got to go. He's so excited to go. And in his mind, he's thinking, I'll find a way. Now I have the permission. I'll already find how to get the curse going. Continues the verse and says, saddled his donkey and went with the Moabite dignitary. Saddled his donkey. When we read this, we think, okay, it's a description. Our commentators tell us this shows how hatred could drive a person so crazy to do things that are undignified. We're talking about Bilam that was considered a very special person. But he couldn't wait. He had to saddle himself his donkey, what normally his servants will do. That's how bad he wants to go and is eager to go do what we would call harm. So there's a famous commentator by the name Rashi. And he says something like this. This line here, he saddled his she-donkey. From here we learn that hate causes a disregard for the standard of dignified conduct. And it's talking, that's what he did, but it's talking about a lot sometimes amongst us. When we get in a situation of hate, we would do something that will completely disregard any standard of dignified conduct. That's how crazy we would do something that don't make sense whatsoever, because all of a sudden we are enraged with hate. Continues Rashi and says, God saw this. The Holy One, blessed he, said, wicked one, their father, the father of the Jewish people, Abraham, has already preceded you with these kinds of tactics. As it says, when it came to the binding of Isaac, the verse says, Abram arose in the morning and saddled his donkey. He was eager to go do what God has asked him to do. So you have from the two spectrums. Here's an individual, Bilam, getting up and saddles his donkey. To what? To go curse the people of God. Abraham is getting up in the morning and he doesn't wait for his servants to saddle the donkey to go do what God wants. What is this telling us? And this is how the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains. Abraham inherited this specialty to all his children to come. That when we are about to do something good for the sake of God, we shouldn't wait for doing something dignified. You're going to do something positive, you're running to help somebody, you say, wait a second, let me wait till my driver comes, or till that, or saddle it. You need to go, you go and you do it. Go out of your way to do something positive. Bilam is turning to God here and he's saying, look, these Jewish people, when it's a regular day, when it's the norm, they behave. But when something goes out of the ordinary, they don't behave. And this is what he's trying to remind God. He's trying to remind God how when they go out of the line, they misbehave. Okay? So what does he do? He gets up in the morning, saddles his donkey to remind this to God. So God tells him, don't worry about it. What you're trying to do is not going to help you, because their father Abraham has shown the other way around. He goes out of the line to do something positive. And this is what they stand for. So it's not going to help you reminding me any kinds of other kinds of hints. So here you have, in a deeper sense, an ultimate transformation. What is the answer that out of hate you do something undignified? Is that out of love you do something of undignified. And that's what we need to do in our days. That there's so much division that we need to work on ourselves to help each other, and in the name of love to do wonderful things in the service of God, and that soon should bring the prophecy that is mentioned here, the ultimate redemption, the coming of the Messiah. Thank you.
Thank you.